or continue what we were doing. Tonight we're glad to have Deborah Rudacille, who is professor of the practice at UMBC and a friend and a co-curator of the new Mercury readings. And also, we're glad to have her. She's going to be reading from 2 articles of hers. She's published books including Roots of Steel, Boom and Bust in an American Mill Town, and she co-hosts this reading series. And she's going to have a new story out in Baltimore Style Magazine's fall issue on youth depression. And tonight, she's going to be reading her piece. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
As John said, I'm a professor of the practice at UMBC. Last year was my first year teaching, and because teaching absorbs so much of your energy, including a lot of your creative energy, I haven't done a lot of writing in the past year, but I have published a few pieces which were really fun to research and write, and I also published something I rarely do, a personal essay. So I thought tonight I'd read you guys one of my reported pieces and the personal essay. And I think I'll start with the personal essay. It's called Southern Gothic. A man named Knuckles is running for sheriff of the Florida county where my Uncle Al settled after he retired from the Air Force in 1971. The current sheriff is named Slaughter. My aunt and cousins were bemused by my exclamations of glee over these Dickensian surnames when I visited in July, that's last July. But I was snatching any excuse to lighten the atmosphere as the occasion for the trip was a sad one. I was accompanying my 79-year-old mother on a last visit to her big brother, confined to a hospital bed and slipping in and out of consciousness since a mini stroke earlier that month. Uncle Al had been on home hospice for inoperable lung cancer since February, but up until his 82nd birthday in June, he'd been tooling around town in his Jazzy, able-bodied enough to rise and hit a few golf balls at a course near his home every few days. The stroke felled him in a way that cancer and chemo couldn't, paralyzing the left side of his body. It was clear to all of us that my mom had better fly down quickly if she wanted to see him while he was still able to talk to her. So in mid-July, my cousin Tom claimed my mother and me at the Jacksonville airport, driving us down the pine-fringed highways to Trenton, a one-traffic-like town in the rural north-central region of the state. It was an odd place for my uncle to have put down roots. Born in Pennsylvania and raised in Baltimore, he had enlisted in the Air Force during the Korean War, serving in the war zone, though not on the front lines. Over a 20-year career as a USAF radio man, he had lived in Alaska, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Key West, Florida. In one of the murkier phases of his career, he had served as a member of a 5-man secret Air Force team, monitoring nuclear tests from Chile prior to the election of the socialist Allende government in the mid-60s. But my aunt had been raised in Florida, and her parents, brother and sister, lived near Trenton. So my cosmopolitan uncle settled near his wife's family like a good husband. As a dark-skinned Italian with a name that ended in a vowel, he didn't exactly blend. When I was a kid, my parents, brother, and I road tripped south every couple of summers to visit them, stopping overnight in South Carolina to break up the 16-hour drive from Baltimore. Swimming in a motel pool the first night of the trip was a treat, but merely a tantalizing appetizer for the main event. Meeting up with Uncle Al, Aunt Peggy, Michael and Tom in Trenton, and together hitting all the Florida attractions within a couple of hours' drive of their home. My brother and I marveled at the curvaceous mermaids at Weeki Wachee and glided over crystal waters in a glass-bottom boat in Silver Springs, a nature theme park in Ocala. And of course, we screamed at the Haunted Mansion and giggled through Mr. Toad's wild ride at Disney World. But we had just as much fun swimming in the snake-infested waters at Hart Springs and tubing lazily down the Itchnatucknee River near Trenton. My brother was even brave enough to try water skiing in the river, till my cousins told him to hail them with a wave if he saw a gator slide into the water. After a face-saving spin on the skis, he hopped right back into the boat. Once we hit adolescence, my slightly older cousin Michael and I discovered other shared interests. Soon after my family pulled into Trenton in old paint, our family Chevy, Michael would say, "Want to take a ride, Debbie?" And we'd jump into his battered pickup truck. Driving down some long, dusty country road bordered by watermelon fields, we'd see another pickup filled with his friends in the distance, stop side by side, and pass a joint back and forth between the trucks. Michael always introduced me as his Yankee cousin and teased me about how fast I talked. On one memorable occasion when our families were vacationing together in Fort Walton Beach on Florida's Gulf Panhandle, Michael proposed drinking Kool-Aid mixed with the juice of psilocybin mushrooms before a family dinner at Howard Johnson's. After dinner, we took our little brothers to see The Deep with Jacqueline Bisset and laughed through the whole movie, which was not a comedy. Those were halcyon days, to be sure, and a lot more fun than our latest meeting, which was shattered by my uncle's looming death, which none of us could bring ourselves to acknowledge. Instead, we sat in the living room, where his hospital bed faced the big flat screen television, and urged him to drink water from the pink and purple sippy cup we bought at the Dollar General, as he could no longer drink from a regular cup without spilling. We worked in teams to turn his emaciated body from side to side to ward off bed sores. We brought him back mashed potatoes from the barbecue joint where we went to dinner, and cheered when he took a few bites. And we talked politics. On the road down from Jacksonville, my cousin Tom, a budget analyst for the Florida Department of Corrections, had pointed out 4 razor-wired prisons on the highway between Jacksonville and Trenton. The prison system is one of the top employers in North Florida, he told my mom and me. But the Republican governor and legislature are itching to privatize corrections, and he's worried about his job. "I'll have 30 years service next year," he said, sitting in his dad's wheelchair, which has become just another sitting option in the living room. "But I don't think I'll be around for 40. Like his dad, who retired from the Air Force at 41, Tom's pretty sure he'll have a second career doing something else. Though he never said so, I'm pretty sure he will be voting for the Democratic ticket this fall, which would have been last fall, of course. Meantime, Michael works for one of the few manufacturers left in Florida making boats. He's been there for 28 years, but is worried about how he'll pay the bills when he has to take off for a couple of months following surgery to repair a torn rotator cuff. He doesn't have disability insurance and doubts that he'll be able to get workman's comp, though it's clear that the injury is caused by years of hard physical labor. His wife is worried that if he takes time off, his employers will fire him. Nonetheless, he was planning to vote for Mitt Romney because, he says, he fixed Massachusetts. Tom said that Florida was a solidly Republican state for decades, but that battles over abortion and gay rights pushed the state into the Republican camp. I wondered aloud how that could be. My aunt, a Republican who used to work for the Board of Elections, said that the state's Democrats no longer felt at home in the party. The party left them, she said. They didn't leave the party. My uncle, a lifelong Democrat, roused himself to croak a single word, Dixiecrats, before slipping back into dreams. And he actually passed away about 10 days after our visit, so it was good that we made it down. And now for something a little cheerier. I realize we've all been kind of dark tonight. When I moved back to Baltimore last spring after having been in New York for about a year and a half, I was hanging around with a friend who's a street art photographer and met her in Richmond and then in Baltimore while the Open Walls project was going on here, and had a hell of a time hanging out with all these street artists. And I wrote a piece which in much altered form was published last fall in Baltimore Fishbowl. So this is the original piece. And I titled it Innocence Abroad. The Italian street artists Pixel Pancho and 2501 lean against a wall of ancient metal advertisements in front of a crab house in West Baltimore. They've just placed their order inside the narrow carryout, the only white men in a dinner scrum of African-American locals. 2 young women with round cheeks and womanly hips eye the scruffily handsome duo with frank interest. When a photographer says, "Heads up, guys, you look good," one of the young women drawls, "They look real good." The 2 artists are in Baltimore after spending a weekend in Richmond where they painted a series of murals in walls around the city as part of a major street art project, the G40 Art Summit. A few days earlier, 2501 was putting finishing touches on a huge black and white mural of a fierce warrior brandishing a sword and riding a roaring lion on a wall fronting a parking lot at 15th and Main in the Shako Bottom district of that city. The god is a Tibetan Buddhist Dharma protector called Dorje Shugden, the 31-year-old artist explained. And he chose the image for the spot after learning that someone had recently been murdered in the parking lot. Here was really dead place when we get it here, he said. Now is making people really happy. That's the hope driving a growing number of cities to sponsor projects like the G40 Summit in Richmond and the Open Walls Project in the Station North Arts District in Baltimore this spring. Similar street art projects are planned or are underway in Atlanta, Rochester, Detroit, and Chicago. Most focus on blighted urban neighborhoods, with city officials banking that the art will draw both locals and tourists and spur business development in these communities. They need feet on the street, says Shane Pajambo, 41, a Washington, D.C. gallery owner who put together the funding to bring in internationally known street artists to Richmond. The idea is to bring people into the neighborhood. Though it's too soon to tell if the brightly painted walls will spark a renaissance in down-and-out neighborhoods in Richmond and Baltimore, the strategy worked in Miami. There, developer Tony Goldman, the driving force behind the transformation of New York City's Soho and South Beach in Miami, sponsors an ongoing street art exhibit in Miami's Wynwood neighborhood. A formerly bleak warehouse district, Wynwood now explodes with color after Goldman commissioned 23 internationally known street artists to paint and wheat paste murals on the windowless facades of the buildings. The Wynwood walls have become an important part of Miami's yearly Art Basel celebration. Restaurants and bars are turning the formerly desolate neighborhood into a thriving arts district. For the artists themselves, the chance to travel on someone else's dime and work unmolested with materials supplied by organizers is worth the discomfort of basic living arrangement, often couches and floors, and small, typically under $1,000 or non-existent stipends. It's unique in history that this is even possible, said the Belgian street artist Roa, who painted 2 walls in Richmond, where he ran into Pixel in 2501, who he had met earlier in Miami during Art Basel. The 3 are among dozens of artists who are on the international street art circuit, spending 9 months or more each year traveling to festivals in Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, and the US. I never pictured that this could even happen, said the 35-year-old Roa, a rising star in the street art world who will be working in London, Australia, and Afghanistan later this year. I thought people would invite me to some local graffiti jam. This is magic or insanity, uncensored art made with $50 worth of paint. More like $9,000 worth of paint and 500 cans of aerosol, says Pajambo, who raised over $30,000 to bring 20 artists to Richmond, house them at a downtown Holiday Inn Express, and secure necessary permissions from business owners and city officials. Like the 23-year-old street artist Gaia, who's curating the Baltimore Open Walls project, Pajambo is leery of the G word. This is not graffiti, he says. There's a difference between destroying property and doing a piece on a wall. Defacing private property is not cool. Gaia, a curly-haired moppet about to graduate from the Maryland Institute College of Art, says that his own work and that of the artist he's bringing to Baltimore is an extension of the studio. It has nothing to do with graffiti at all. Nonetheless, many of the artists participating in the Baltimore and Richmond projects admit to doing illegal work in the past, and some are still unwilling to have their faces photographed. The artists Angry Wobots and Scribe, who painted facing walls off Broad Street, Richmond's main shopping district, were both arrested in their younger days. 2 of my professors in art school turned me in, and I got kicked out of school in '93, says Scribe. I was on the news a lot. Eventually, he started getting commissions to do large-scale murals, and today he's art director of a children's hospital in the same city where he was arrested. They were timid at first, he said. They knew about my graffiti background. He is married and has 2 kids of his own now, he points out, and is past the age at which running from the police seems like an adventure. It was fun to tag and bomb when we were kids, points out Angry Wobots, a 34-year-old native of Hawaii who was arrested in 1997 and cites West Coast gang graffiti as the school that nurtured him. I don't even call myself a graffiti artist now, though a lot of my mentors are graph artists. Graffiti is letter-based and sprayed on fast and dirty, they say. I was taught that if you can't do it with a can, don't do it at all, says Scribe. By contrast, street artists use a range of materials and techniques to create large-scale images that can and do take days to execute, usually with the aid of mechanical lifts rented by festival organizers. In Richmond, the Puerto Rican duo La Pandilla used tiny brushes to painstakingly ink a 10-foot high wall, while the Argentinian artist Jazz mixed tar with mineral spirits to create a brownish wash that imparts a primitive feel to a mural of two headless conquistador-like figures surrounded by a crowd of seated natives. In Baltimore 2 weeks later, the Portuguese artist Vils and his assistants drilled an arresting image of a man's face into a crumbling brick wall. You can still see that, as you can see most of these around the Station North Arts District. I'm going to skip down a little. Pixel Poncho and 2501 decided to pop by Baltimore on their way to New York City. Finding that Gaia was out of officially approved walls and out of supplies, they decided to find their own walls. They wound up in Sowebo, a hardscrabble neighborhood on the west side of town, where the legendary New York City graffiti photographer Martha Cooper keeps a house. Cooper introduced them to some local business owners who were enthusiastic about the two painting murals on their buildings. The artists were pleased by this outcome. If I chose, I would choose this neighborhood, said Pixel. It's more fun. Unlike Station North, a designated art district in the early stages of gentrification, Sowebo remains a hardcore urban ghetto where trash and crack vials litter the street. It's sad, this neighborhood, seeing how people live. The children don't smile, said Pixel. Before they started working, the owner of Zeskin's hardware store asked them if they had a gun. When they said no, he advised them to finish up their work by 5 every day. But they did score a tall aluminum ladder for $30 from a guy walking the neighborhood asking if anyone wanted to buy it. The two bombed a train for old time's sake while in town. It took 25 minutes, says 2501, compared to the 2 days it took them to finish their first wall. Driving through a particularly bleak stretch of West Baltimore, full of peeling walls and boarded up houses, blank canvases awaiting the hand of the artist, Pixel sighed. Give me 3 months and I could destroy this city, he says.